elderly immigrant expelled from the bank. Minutes later, the manager finds out who she is. The bell of the bank door still vibrated when the gray-haired lady was literally pushed out. "Come back when you can speak English right," shouted James Morrison, the manager, before knocking the glass door hard enough to make other customers look embarrassed. Margaret Volkov, 73, held his handed bag firmly and took a deep breath. He had arrived in the United States just 3 months ago, fleeing the war in his home country, and each word in English was still a battle. But what James didn't know was that behind that hesitant accent was a woman who had already faced much worse storms. "Madam, is everything okay?" asked Michael Santos, a young employee who had witnessed the whole scene inside. He opened the door discreetly, ignoring James's furious gaze. Margaret smiled kindly. In his broken but determined English, he replied, "I'm fine, thank you. Just need, as they say, open an account to receive a pension." "Don't waste your time with these people," interrupted James, adjusting his expensive tie like a armor. "Look at her. You probably don't even have the $1,000 of the minimum premium account rate." Public humiliation was just the beginning. James had made a point of talking loud enough for the whole agency to hear, turning Margaret into a degrading spectacle. The other customers looked away, clearly uncomfortable, but no one dared to confront the manager known for his adamant authority. "These people come here thinking that they can simply enter and receive special treatment," continued James to his assistant Rebecca, who only nervously nervous. "You need to understand that this is a serious bank, not a refugee charity." The comment was followed by discreet laughs from some employees. Margaret kept the composure, but his eyes captured every detail. James's full name on his golden plate, the bank's layout, the security cameras, and especially the reaction of each person present. "Maybe she should try that community bank across town," Rebecca suggested with false sympathy. "They are more suitable for this type of customer." What James couldn't realize were the details that Michael had noticed. The discreet but obviously expensive watch on Margaret's wrist, the upright posture of someone used to command, the genuine leather shoes under the simple pants, and especially that look, too serene for someone who had just been publicly humiliated. Margaret had faced much worse situations during the war. Men like James existed in all countries, small tyrants who used their limited authority to compensate for their own insecurities. She knew this kind perfectly and knew exactly how to deal with them. 40 years driving one of his country's largest corporations had taught him never to waste information, especially when he was being underestimated. Every insult, every gesture of contempt, every name mentioned, everything would be useful very soon. "Take it," Michael whispered, sliding his business card discreetly in Margaret's hand when James turned to serve a VIP customer. "Call me tomorrow. I can help you at another time." Margaret just nodded, carefully keeping the card. "Thank you, young. You have a good heart." While walking through the agency being escorted out, Margaret observed the movement of VIP customers being treated with reverence. One of them, an expensive man, was depositing a considerable check. James practically bowed before him. "Have an excellent day, Mr. Williams," said James with his best professional smile. "It will be a pleasure to process your international transfer." On the sidewalk, Margaret pulled his cell phone and dialed a number. The conversation was brief in a language that none of the bank's employees would recognize. When he hung up, an almost imperceptible smile crossed his face. "Yes, I found the perfect bench for our operation," murmured to herself in perfect English, with no trail of the hesitant accent that had shown minutes earlier. At that moment, Margaret just looked like another rejected immigrant trying to survive in a new country. But those who watched carefully would note something intriguing. She walked like someone who already knew exactly what her next movement would be. And most importantly, as someone who kept a secret too powerful to reveal before the right time. If you are enjoying this story of overcoming injustice, do not forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple humiliation would become the biggest mistake James would make in your entire career. The next morning, Margaret returned to the bank, this time accompanied or a young volunteer translator named Sophia, who had met in the community center. His strategy was simple, to give James exactly what he expected, an unknowable immigrant begging for a second chance. "Please, Mr. Morrison," said Sophia, interpreting Margaret's carefully chosen words. "My grandmother really needs an account. She has money from selling her home in her home and needs to receive the government's pension." James didn't even raise the eyes of his computer. "I already explained yesterday, this bank serves qualified customers. I suggest that they look for a credit cooperative or that community bank of the center." What James didn't know was that Margaret understood every word he said. Its 40 years as Volkov Industries CEO had required 6 languages fluency, including impeccable English learned in Oxford. Every insult, every gesture of contempt was being meticulously catalogued in his analytical mind. "How much money does she really have?" Rebecca asked, the assistant, with malicious curiosity that could barely disguise. Sophia consulted Margaret, who whispered something in her Christmas tongue with humble expression. She says she sold the house for about $50,000. James released a tall laugh that echoed through the whole agency. 50,000. Rebecca, explain to these people that our VIP customers deposit this in a single routine transaction. Perhaps they should try that city center bank that accepts anyone. The humiliation of this second visit was deliberately orchestrated to be even worse than the first. James made a point of talking loud enough for other customers to hear, turning Margaret into a public spectacle of embarrassment. Look, said James, finally wondered to look at them with theatrical impatience. I'll be completely straightforward. This is a bank for serious people, serious money and American documentation in order. It's not a refugee exchange house. Margaret kept the expression humble, but his eyes watched James typing his password on the computer, memorizing each movement of the fingers. She also noticed the identification badge swinging in her pocket and the agency's security pattern, information that would be extremely useful very soon. You don't understand how the American banking system works, James continued for your involuntary audience of embarrassed customers. There is a hierarchy, patterns to be kept. We can't simply open the doors to anyone who appears here. During this public humiliation, Margaret discreetly observed the movement at the agency. She saw how James treated some customers with exaggerated reverence, especially David Chen, a local businessman who apparently made regular international transfers of considerable values. Mr. Chen, what a pleasure to see him again, said James with a servile smile as the businessman approached. Your transfer to Singapore was sued yesterday. As always, a pleasure to do business with someone of its caliber. The difference in treatment was stark and intentional. Margaret thanked politely and left, but not before observing every detail. The names in the James Table business cards, the account numbers displayed on the monitors, and especially the company's Wi-Fi password that a distracted employee had left noted in a post-it. That afternoon, Margaret made an international call from her modest apartment. The conversation lasted 40 minutes and was conducted in perfect English with British executive accent, a result of years studying in Oxford during his youth and decades sailing international markets. Confirm transfers to tomorrow morning, she said, consulting detailed notes about the bank and her employees. Yes, 3 different accounts. Exact values as we discussed. First of 2 million, after 5 million, and finally the main deposit. Meanwhile, James celebrated another day protecting bank standards during the happy hour with colleagues at the corner bar. You needed to see that old man's face when I explained that $50,000 don't even qualify someone for a meeting with me, he said, causing laughter from the table. These people need to understand that we are not in the United States to make life easier for those who do not belong here, he added, raising his beer as a toast to his own intolerance. What James could not imagine was that, at that very moment, Margaret was reviewing documents that would prove to be the majority owner of one of the largest technology companies in Eastern Europe, a company that coincidentally was considering establishing its American headquarters in the city, bringing thousands of jobs and moving hundreds of millions of dollars. She had survived a civil war, reconstructed an industrial river of the rubble, sailed by decades of international corporate policy, and faced much more powerful men than James Morrison. A small banking tyrant would just be another insignificant obstacle to be elegantly removed from its path. Margaret smiled when closing the documents and calling her personal assistant in London. James Morrison was about to find that some people not only speak English perfectly, they also speak the universal language of money in volumes that would make their little provincial mind explode with shock. Each new humiliation only fed something inside her that men like James could not see, a silent force built by decades of achievements that their oppressors could never understand, and which was about to manifest in a way that would completely redefine the concept of who actually belonged to that bank. Margaret spent the next 3 days running the first phase of his plan, with the surgical accuracy of those who had commanded corporate billions of dollars. Each movement was calculated, every meticulously planned detail. On Wednesday, she contacted Thomas Richardson, one of the city's most respected lawyers and former Oxford colleague. Thomas, I need your services to a very specific transaction, said his voice finally revealing the polite British accent he had hidden for days. Margaret Volkoff, my God, I thought you were still in Europe. I read about the situation in your country. Of course, anything you need. Meanwhile, James remained his routine of arrogance, having no idea that he was being observed. Margaret had discovered his habits. He always arrived at 8:15 a.m., had lunch in the same restaurant, and made a point of humiliating at least one inappropriate client per day. On Thursday, Margaret returned to the bench accompanied by Sophia, this time carrying a small briefcase. She had purposely chosen the highest, moving time when James would be in her element, displaying her authority to the maximum audience. "Oh no, not again," moaned James as he saw them in. "Rebecca, call security. These people don't learn." Margaret humbly approached the counter, Sophia by her side translating. "Please, sir, my grandmother brought some money today. She wants to show that she is serious about opening the account." James rolled his eyes theatrically. "How many times do I need to explain? $50,000 do not make anyone client in this bank. You are wasting my time." It was then that Margaret opened the briefcase. Inside, organized in meticulous packages, there were $100,000 in 100 notes, just a small sample of what was to come. The silence at the agency was instantaneous. Other customers turned to look, and even Rebecca stopped typing. "This is $100,000 in kind," whispered a close client. James blinked several times, trying to process the information. Where did she get it?" Sophia consulted Margaret, who responded in her Christmas language with still humble expression. "She says she sold some family jewels. Want to know if it's enough now to open an account." For a moment, James hesitated. The view of money had clearly shaken his confidence, but his arrogance was stronger than his surprise. "Well, it changes things a little, but I still need to check the origin of these funds. We can't accept money from a dubious source." Margaret nodded patiently as James began a deliberately humiliating interrogation about each note on the briefcase. He made a point of telling the money high, commenting on special procedures for this type of customer. What James didn't know was that Margaret was recording each word through a discreet device that Sophia carried. Each prejudiced comment, every hint at the dubious origin of the back, every gesture of contempt was being documented with crystal audio quality. During the process, Margaret noted discreetly as James attended David Chen, who had reached a routine transaction. The difference in treatment was stark. No question about funds origin, no questioning about documentation, only smiles and reverences. "Mr. Chen, as always, a pleasure. Your transfer to Hong Kong will be processed immediately," James said with his best servile posture. After 2 hours of deliberate humiliation, James finally agreed to consider open an account to Margaret, but only after additional security checks that could take weeks. That night, Margaret made a call to London that would last 3 hours. The conversation was entirely in English, discussing bank transfers, corporate acquisitions, and investment strategies that would make James's minds explode if he could hear. "Confirm the transferences for Monday," instructed Margaret. "And Thomas, I want all legal documents to be ready. He had several opportunities to treat me with basic dignity." Thomas Richardson laughed on the other end of the line. "Margaret, you were always diabolical when it came to business. This poor man has no idea what is about to happen." Margaret smiled, organizing the recordings she had collected and the discreet photographs that Sophia had taken during the visits. "Thomas, he had 3 chances of treating me like a human being. He chose to see me as inferior because of my accent and appearance. Now he'll learn that judging people on the surface is the most expensive mistake someone can make." On Friday, Margaret made a last visit to the bank, this time just to observe. James was in his element, humiliating another elderly client who had brought documents in Spanish. The scene was painfully familiar, and Margaret realized that she was not the only victim of that man's systematic arrogance. She was about to become the voice of all those who James had humiliated over the years, and justice would be served in a way that would completely redefine the concept of who really controlled that bank. On Monday morning at 9:47 a.m., James Morrison was checking out the balances of the VIP accounts when his computer issued an alert that made his coffee cool in the cup. An international transfer of $2 million had just been deposited in Margaret Volkoff's account. "Rebecca, come see this," stammered James, winking several times to make sure she wasn't hallucinating. "Do you have a system error?" Rebecca approached and almost knocked her pile of documents. "2 million? Where did this come from?" Before they could completely process the information, another warning sounded. $5 million, then 40, 3 million. In 15 minutes, the refugee bank account that James had humiliated 3 times contained more money than all the bank's VIP accounts combined. James's phone rang with emergencies reserved for emergencies only. He was the president of the bank, Mr. Davidson, and his voice shaking a mixture of panic and unbelief. "Morrison, I need you to explain to me now as the hell you let the largest corporate client who have ever been our doors, Ruju Davidson. I just received a call from Thomas Richardson informing that Margaret Volkoff, CEO of Volkoff Industries, wants to transfer all U.S. bank operations to our competition." James felt the blood drain from his face. "Margaret Volkoff, from Volkoff Industries? The same Margaret Volkoff that you treated like trash last week," exploded Davidson. "The woman who runs a technology empire of $15 billion and was considering establishing the American headquarters here. bringing 1,000 jobs and moving 100 million a month. At that moment, the bank's automatic doors opened and Margaret entered, this time without Sophia, without hesitant accent and carrying an Italian leather paste that cost more than James's monthly salary. She walked directly to the James counter, her posture radiating the authority of decades running international boardrooms. When he spoke, his English was impeccable, with the polite British accent of whom he studied at Oxford. "Mr. Morrison, I believe we have pending issues to discuss." James swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he tried to process the complete transformation of the woman in front of her. "Mrs. Volkov, I didn't know." "Didn't you know that I was fluent in English? Didn't you know that I was CEO of one of the largest companies in Europe? Or did you not know that judging people for their appearance and accent is not only morally disgusting, but also financially devastating to your career?" Margaret opened his folder and placed on the counter the transcripts of all recorded conversations, photographs of public humiliations, and especially the documents that proved his real identity. "I have here records of 3 distinct occasions where you treated me as a second-class citizen. Comments on this kind of people, questions about the dubious origin of my funds, and especially the recorded statement that people like me do not belong to this place." James tried to speak, but Margaret raised his hand with the authority of those who were used to running rooms full of powerful executives. "For 40 years, I built an empire of the rubble of a war. I faced much more powerful men than you and survived situations that would make your privileged existence look like a fairy tale. And you, Morrison, made the fatal mistake of confusing humility and weakness." The entire agency had stopped to watch. Other clients whispered with each other, some discreetly recording with their cell phones. Rebecca E.S. He was pale as a roll, realizing that he had participated in the humiliation of the richest woman he had ever stepped in that bank. $50 million, said Margaret calmly. "This is the value that your ignorance cost this bank. It was the initial deposit I planned to do before transferring all Volkov Industries operations here." Thomas Richardson chose that moment to enter the bank, carrying a pile of cool documents. "Margaret, the papers are ready. Where would you like us to direct the company's banking operations?" Margaret smiled, finally revealing the complete extension of her power. "Thomas, after careful customer service analysis of this institution, we decided that First National Bank will be a much more appropriate choice for our corporate needs." The sound of James's financial empire crumbling was almost audible. $50 million, 1,000 jobs, international operations, all slipping by the fingers because of their systematic arrogance against immigrants. Margaret turned to leave, but stopped at the door to utter the words James would never forget. "Mr. Morrison, the next time someone with a different accent entering your bank, you may remember that intelligence and success have no nationality, and that underestimating people is a luxury that small men like you just can't get." 3 months later, First National Bank officially announced that it would become Volkov Industries bank headquarters for all U.S. operations. The inauguration ceremony of the new partnership took place in the main hall of the city's most luxurious hotel, with the presence of local authorities, entrepreneurs, and the entire regional financial elite. Margaret, now publicly recognized as one of the most influential women in the world technological sector, spoke to an audience of 200 people about the company's expansion plans, 1,000 new jobs, investments in educational technology for needy communities, and a $50 million fund to support small immigrant entrepreneurs. "America has always been the land of opportunities," Margaret told the microphone, his voice echoing through the elegant salon. "But true opportunities exist only when we treat each person with the dignity they deserve, regardless of their origin or accent." On the opposite side of the city, James Morrison cleaned his table in the small office of the credit cooperative where he had got a job after being fired. The scandal of his discriminatory recordings had spread to social networks, becoming viral with more than 2 million views in just 1 week. "Former banking management humiliates CEO immigrant billionaire. See the devastating consequences," was the title that dominated the headlines. James had lost not only his job, but also the bank funded by the bank, the marriage that could not resist public pressure, and especially the reputation that had taken years to build. Michael Santos, on the other hand, had been promoted to the First National Bank regional manager, responsible for implementing the new financial inclusion program for immigrants Margaret had created. His decision to treat Margaret with basic humanity had completely changed the course of his career. During the ceremony, Margaret made a point of telling her story publicly. 3 months ago, I was humiliated in a bank of this city for having a foreign accent. The manager told me that people like me did not belong to that place. Today I announce that people like me will bring prosperity, jobs, and opportunities for this community. The audience applauded standing, but Margaret was not over. I learned that the best response to prejudice is not hatred, but success. The best revenge against those who underestimate us is to build something bigger than they could ever imagine. Rebecca, former James' assistant, watched the television ceremony of her new home. He had been hired as customer service coordinator at Volkov Industries after Margaret found that she had secretly always disagreed with James's discriminatory attitudes, but never had the courage to confront him. When you see someone being treated unfairly and does nothing, you become part of the problem, Margaret had said during Rebecca's interview. But when you recognize the error and commit to doing differently, it deserves a second chance. Thomas Richardson smiled proud to watch Margaret speak. 40 years of friendship, and she keeps surprising me, commented with her wife. I always knew that Margaret would turn any obstacle into opportunity. The impact of Margaret's story echoed far beyond that city. Civil rights organizations invited her to lectures, universities offered fear titles, and especially hundreds of immigrants reported on social networks how their history had been given courage to face similar situations. Sophia, the young translator who had helped Margaret, now worked as coordinator of the Mentoria program for immigrant entrepreneurs at Volkov Industries. Margaret taught me that sometimes we need to speak the language that our oppressors understand, the language of success, told during an interview. While Margaret ended her speech at the ceremony, a question from the audience made her smile. Which advice would you give to immigrants who face discrimination? Always remember that your origin is your strength, not your weakness, that your accent carries the wisdom of worlds that your oppressors will never know, and especially, that success is the best answer to those who try to decrease us. A year later, James was still working at the credit cooperative, gaining a third of what he received before. Every morning, passing in front of the building where Volkov Industries' regional office operated, he remembered how a simple demonstration of humanity could have completely changed his trajectory. Margaret Volkov had proved that some people not only survive the storm, they become the strength that rewrite the rules of the game, and that sometimes the greatest revenge is simply to show the world who you really are. Margaret's story became legend in the city, always remembered that someone thought of judging a person for his appearance or accent, because she had done something that few get, turned prejudice into purpose, humiliation into success, and discrimination into the driving force of a silent revolution that changed lives forever. If this story has inspired you, subscribe to the channel to discover more real cases of people who have turned injustice into triumph, proving that true power is never to allow others to define our value.